In the misty hills of North Carolina, where the mornings carry the scent of pine and rust, a woman named Daisy Monroe opened the creaky doors of her old garage. The light was still soft, barely spilling through the fog, catching on the dust that danced in the air like ghosts of old stories. Daisy wasn't just any mechanic. She was the kind of woman whose hands told stories of 1,000 engines resurrected, whose heart beat for machines long forgotten. To her, every car had a soul, and every restoration was a quiet resurrection. That morning, something pulled her stronger than usual. In the corner of the garage, under a tarp covered in years of silence, rested a 1959 Cadillac Coupe de Ville. Its paint was faded, chrome dull, tires sunken, but its presence was undeniable, like a sleeping monument from another life. It had been sitting in a field for over 50 years, owned by a man who died with no family to claim it. At the auction, people had laughed, called it junk, scrap, a lost cause. But when Daisy saw it, something in her chest tightened. She bid every dollar she had, knowing it wasn't logic guiding her, it was instinct. That car wasn't a project, it was a calling, the kind that whispers from beyond time. And that day, when she pulled the tarp away, she didn't just find a car waiting for repair. She found a story buried in steel, a secret the Cadillac had carried through decades of silence, waiting for the right hands to wake it up. As Daisy stepped closer, she could almost feel the car breathing, as if it remembered the days it once ruled the open roads. The faded paint still reflected light like a dream refusing to die. She popped the hood, inspected the engine, and found the usual rusted bolts, corroded wires, hoses hardened by time, nothing she couldn't handle. But when she climbed inside and sat down, something felt wrong. The seat didn't sink the way it should. It was firm, unyielding, almost deliberate. She frowned, pressing down again, still solid. She slid across the bench, trying to move it forward, but it refused. "Don't be stubborn now," she muttered under her breath. Grabbing a flashlight, she peered underneath, expecting years of dust and mouse nests. But something caught her eye, a faint shape, not metal, not wiring, but something soft and square wedged deep inside. Her pulse quickened. With her trusty pry bar and persistence, she fought rusted bolts that groaned like they hadn't moved in a lifetime. It took nearly an hour, her breath fogging in the cold air, sweat streaking her temples, before the seat finally broke free with a metallic crack. Beneath it, in a hollow cavity, she found something that didn't belong to any machine, two worn leather satchels, sealed tight, heavy with mystery. Daisy froze, the sound of her heartbeat louder than the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a mechanic's find. It was a message from the past, and somehow she knew her life was about to change forever. Daisy carried the satchels to her workbench like fragile relics. The leather was aged but soft, smelling of dust, mildew, and history. She hesitated for a long moment before undoing the first buckle. It gave with a low groan like it was exhaling after decades of silence. Inside were papers, old letters, folded neatly, tied with crumbling twine. She spread them out gently, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the first one. The handwriting was elegant, the ink faded but still legible. "My dearest Lillian," it began. The date read July 14th, 1961. Daisy read slowly, her voice barely a whisper. The words spoke of love, of fear, of a man named Thomas separated from his wife and daughter by war and circumstance. Each line carried longing and heartbreak, written by hands that once believed they could outlast time. Then she opened the second satchel and found more documents stamped by the government, receipts, and something heavier wrapped in velvet. Inside was gold, jewelry, pocket watches, brooches, heirlooms glimmering beneath the light. Her breath caught. Each piece told of wealth, of legacy, of something precious enough to hide. At the very bottom, she found an envelope sealed with red wax, marked by an unfamiliar symbol. The words, "Do not open unless you are the rightful one." The air grew heavy around her. Daisy didn't open it, not yet. Some part of her knew that whatever truth lay inside, it wasn't ready to be told. Not until she was. That night Daisy barely slept. Every creak of the garage seemed to whisper the same question: who were Lillian and Thomas? And why was their story buried in a car seat? By sunrise, she stood again before the Cadillac, coffee in one hand, the sealed envelope in the other. The garage didn't feel like a workshop anymore. It felt like a chapel. The air was charged, sacred. She remembered her father's words. "Every old engine carries ghosts, sweetheart. You just have to listen close enough." And now she could hear tea. Lena Marshall thought she was just buying a fixer-upper, an old stone mansion auctioned off for 75 cents. 75. That's less than a cup of coffee. But what she really bought that day wasn't a house. It was a secret, one buried so deep beneath its floors that people had killed to keep it hidden. The locals in Red Hollow, Arizona, whispered when she placed her bid. No one else raised a hand, not one. The place had been left to rot for decades, but their silence wasn't about mold or termites. It was about what the house remembered. When Lena turned that brass key for the first time, she expected dust and decay. What she got was a door that opened too easily, air that smelled like it had been waiting for her, and walls that seemed to listen. She was a mechanic, grease under her nails, stubborn in spirit, not the kind of woman you'd expect to unravel a political conspiracy. But that mansion had plans of its own, and once she stepped inside, there was no going back. For the first few nights, everything felt normal. She cleaned, she fixed, she explored. But on the third night, when the desert wind screamed through the canyon and the shutters rattled like bones, Lena heard it, a soft, rhythmic thump beneath the east wing walls. It wasn't pipes. It wasn't wind. It was deliberate. Something was knocking. The east wing had been sealed, the doorway plastered over, the bookshelves positioned like camouflage. She could see the outline where the old frame used to be. So she did what she always did, grabbed her tools. When the drywall gave way, dust exploded into the air, but behind it wasn't decay. It was preservation. A library untouched for decades, with books still standing straight and a Persian rug too clean for the years it had supposedly slept. And beneath that rug, a hatch, brass handle polished, not hidden, just ignored, like someone was waiting for the right person to open it. Lena hesitated, flashlight trembling in her hand. But curiosity, especially hers, always wins. The hatch hissed open like a held breath. She descended into the dark. What she found would change her life and expose a secret buried for 30 years. The air below was too clean, too organized. No cobwebs, no decay, just filing cabinets, neat, labeled, and deliberate. Lena pulled one open and froze. Newspaper clippings, government documents, photographs, each labeled confidential. Each signed by names she recognized, local officials, land surveyors, even the mayor himself, Franklin Pierce. The papers described a land acquisition scheme that stretched across counties, stolen property, falsified deeds, forged signatures. Fraud on a scale that could topple the entire town. And at the bottom of one document, a single signature that turned her blood to ice. Mayor Franklin Pierce. He was still in office. That's when the sound came, a soft creak from above. Her flashlight flickered across the ceiling. A shadow moved past the open hatch. Someone was upstairs, someone who knew exactly what she'd found. Lena froze in that pitch-black cellar, her heartbeat echoing louder than the creaking wood above. Whoever was up there wasn't breaking in. They were checking in, watching, waiting. Lena crept up the stairs, careful not to breathe too loud. The shadow had moved into the foyer. When she finally emerged, lamp in hand, she saw him tall, calm, confident, his suit too clean for a midnight visit. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find it," he said. His voice was smooth, like someone who didn't worry about being caught. "Do I know you?" she asked, tightening her grip on the lamp. The man smiled. "Everett Pierce, my father's the mayor." Her stomach dropped. He stepped closer. "That basement isn't just storage, it's insurance, the only thing keeping half this town out of prison." Lena's voice was sharp. "You mean it's evidence?" He tilted his head. "Call it what you want, I call it leverage, and now it's yours. That complicates things." Then, with one glance that said too much, he turned and walked out. Two black SUVs waited at the end of her driveway, engines idling. That was her warning. The message was clear. Walk away or they'd bury her, the same way they'd buried the truth. By morning, Lena was gone, not running, but searching. She drove straight to Clayton Ridge to find one man who might believe her, retired Sheriff Dean Talbot. When she handed him the files, his face went pale. "You realize what you've got here? This isn't small-town corruption. This is federal." He flipped through the contracts, judges, auditors, senators. Every page was another nail in Red Hollow's coffin. Then he pulled out an old envelope from his own cabinet. 30 years ago," he said, "I tried to dig into land claims like these, got threatened, my wife left. They told me to stop, so I did, but I never threw this away." Inside were maps, photos, and letters, the same names. "They've been doing this since before you were born. You just found the root." Lena looked him dead in the eyes. "Then help me dig." And for the first time in decades, the old sheriff nodded. The two of them weren't just fighting corruption anymore. They were fighting a machine built on fear, one that didn't tolerate survivors. Lena needed more than evidence, she needed exposure. She reached out to an investigative journalist, Mira Delgado, whose stories had toppled politicians and sent CEOs to prison. They met in a quiet diner. Lena slid the bag of documents across the table. Mira flipped through it, her eyes widening. "If even half this is real, we're sitting on dynamite." But when Lena told her about the SUVs, Mira's tone changed. "Then we move fast. You won't survive long if we don't." That night they scanned everything, encrypted copies on remote servers, insurance. The next morning, Lena returned home to find an envelope taped to her gate. No signature, just 6 words: "This is your last warning. Leave." She burned the letter in her fireplace. The truth was no longer buried, and the people who'd buried it were losing control. When the story broke, it hit like an earthquake. "Small-town mechanic exposes decades-long land fraud," the headline read. Red Hollow's phones rang non-stop. The mayor denied everything. But the footage didn't lie. Surveillance of Everett Pierce entering the mansion, letters threatening Lena, testimony from families who'd lost their homes. Within 48 hours, arrests began. Franklin Pierce handcuffed on live television. Everett vanished. Federal agents turned Lena's mansion into evidence. But to her, it wasn't a loss, it was freedom. She stood on the steps as the sun rose over Red Hollow, no longer the town's mechanic, but its mirror reflecting everything it had tried to hide. And for the first time, people started showing up at her door. Farmers, widows, veterans, each carrying their own story of land stolen, voices silenced. One by one, they joined her. One woman whispered, "I was scared before, but not anymore." The fear that had kept Red Hollow quiet for decades finally broke. Months later, the old mansion stood tall again, repaired, repainted, reborn. The cellar that once hid secrets now held truth, open for everyone to see. Lena turned it into a community archive, a place where people could trace their land, reclaim their stories, and learn that silence only protects the powerful. Letters poured in from across the country. One read, "You don't know me, but because of you, I found the courage to speak." Lena smiled, folded it gently, and looked out over the hills. She had bought a house for 75 cents, but what she truly purchased was freedom for herself, for her town, for anyone who ever thought they were too small to matter. And as the camera would fade on that orange Arizona sunset, her voice would echo one last truth. The past only owns you if you let it stay buried. Dig, always dig. If you believe truth deserves a voice, hit subscribe, because stories like this, they're just getting started.